Hello, good morning and welcome. Welcome back to the north of Scotland, the far north of Scotland, where outside it is absolutely wonderful weather, raining and windy. Now I have work to do outside, but well, I'm getting older and it's not such an attractive idea to me. Maybe later on today, maybe if the rain eases off a little bit. In the meantime, for anybody who's watching from the US, what you're looking at, you'll all recognise it's a V8 engine. This is in a car that is, let me think now, I think it's 51 years or 52 years old, 52 years old. And I'll tell you a little bit about this car, this engine that I've been working on. I'll tell you a little bit about it shortly. But first of all, I'm going to tell you a story. It's story time, rainy Wednesday story time. It's a story of when I was at university, and it's a story about people and the way that people are, and the way they surprise me, not particularly in a good way. So here's a mechanicking story, preservation, conservation. A friend of mine said that he had a colleague who was doing a PhD, a doctorate in psychology, and they had a car which was giving them a problem, and he wondered if I could have a look at it. So I said, sure, yeah, no problem. I mean, I wasn't very good at that point in time with mechanics. In fact, I would say I was terrible, but I was also significantly better than a lot of other people of the same age at university. Academic knowledge, but not an awful lot of practical knowledge. I've talked about this before. So I went to the car, and the problem was that it was a manual car, stick shift I think it's called in the US. And when you put your foot on the clutch and engage the clutch, the engine would stall. Now, I didn't know a lot, but I thought, okay, there's a problem somewhere on the thrust bearing, so the engine's going to have to come out so I can get to the thrust bearing and have a look. So it was a girl who had the car who was doing a PhD in psychology, and she said, okay, I've had a quote from the garage to look at and fix the problem, but it's too much money, I can't afford it. Do you think you can do this? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I can have a go. I can have a look. Until I take the engine out, I'm not sure, but I think it's the thrust bearing. So she said, how much is the thrust bearing? Now, I can't actually remember, but I think at the time, the thrust bearing may have been £40 sterling, somewhere in that area. So she said, okay, cool. If you can do it, have a go. I said, okay. So I was at university. I was doing an undergraduate degree. So I had things to do during the day. I would work on the car in the evening. So I took the engine out of the car, and I thought the thrust bearing, certainly the bearing had collapsed. So I thought, okay, there's the problem. I was young. I didn't think of options or alternatives. I bought a new thrust bearing. I put the thrust bearing into the car, put the engine back into the car, started the car up, engaged the clutch, engine stalled. Okay, so by this time, working in the evenings, it was probably this was the third day of having the car. I explained to the owner that I'd changed the thrust bearing, but that wasn't what the problem was, and she started to get quite irritated with me, saying she needed the car. She was having to borrow her mother's car in the meantime, and she needed the car, and if she'd known it was going to take so long, she would never have given me the car to work on. Now, you have to bear in mind, I was doing this for free, just the cost of the parts. So I apologised and said I'm going to have to take the engine out again and have a look. So out came the engine the second time, and I had a look at it carefully, this time carefully, and saw that, okay, the thrust bearing certainly had been a problem, but the thrust bearing had also given rise to another problem, which was the mechanism that pushes the thrust bearing into position against the clutch plates. Well, a pressure plate actually. It's a fork, and it operates on a spring, and it moves forward and pushes the thrust bearing, which can spin, onto the clutch, and therefore disengages the clutch. The fork was bent, so this is why it wasn't working. Possibly why the thrust bearing had gone in the first place. So that was easy. With the engine out, I simply bent the fork back into place, checked that it was pushing the thrust bearing. I should have done all this before, but I was inexperienced. Put the engine back in and the car worked. By this time I was probably a week and a half in to the repair. So car all fixed, car all sorted, tell the owner the car is fixed, and she was absolutely livid with me. And she informed me in no uncertain terms that I was getting no money for anything at all that I'd done because it had inconvenienced her. Now, okay, it inconvenienced her. It took a week and a half. And I had to take the engine out twice. My own problem. I bought the part, only one part. It was 40 or 45 pounds sterling. Now, she refused to pay because she said the car had been out of action for so long it would be inconvenient to her mother, and she should never have given the car to me to try and fix, and forget about money. Oh, okay, what's the moral of that story? Well, I was doing the repair for nothing for the labour anyway, it was simply for a matter of parts. There is no moral to the story. I just found it, at the time, because I was young, I found it quite upsetting that she was so angry with me. But now when I look back, I think what an incredible amount of ingratitude and entitlement that this PhD student felt so entitled to servitude from others that she could berate me, an unqualified person who had fixed her car, but it had taken longer than she wanted. It had also cost her nothing at all, but had she paid me, it would have cost her 40 or 45 pounds sterling, which was not a great deal of money. She'd been quoted hundreds of pounds, I would say at this point, by a garage for looking after and repairing the car. Now, maybe that was the beginning of entitlement culture, I don't know. And maybe it's just always been. People who cannot do things, berating people who do things because it hasn't been done at their convenience or their perfect convenience. That's something that's quite annoying. Before I get onto the engine of the story of the engine, rather, it reminds me very much of our elected leaders, our politicians, and our unelected leaders, members of the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization, for example. They remind me very much of that girl. She was obviously worthy of respect in her view, and she wanted things done as she wanted them done, and she was entitled to have them done that way. And if they were not done that way, she saw no reason why she should have either gratitude, thanks, or cost. And that's like our politicians and like our unelected leaders. They're all actually quite useless. They can perform no functional task other than talking and dictating. They can perform no tasks. They have to get us to do it all for them. So, how do these useless people have so much power? And why do we give deference to them? Why do we bow to their superiority? I mean, they have none because they can't do anything. It's curious, isn't it? The young lady couldn't do anything at all practical. She was doing a PhD in psychology, however, so she would become a doctor of psychology, and she would be able to tell people what was wrong with them, why they thought the way they did, why they needed to change their behaviour. But she couldn't fix her car. And when I did, granted taking longer than she wished, when I did fix her car, she was extremely annoyed because it had not been at her convenience. As I say, like our politicians, useless people, not capable of doing anything, get others to do it, and also be angry with them for not doing it at their convenience. I would guess she had the upper hand because she had the money which she wouldn't give to me. There was nothing I could do. I guess the politicians and the unelected leaders have things in their favour because they have the armies and they have the enforcement bodies to make us comply with their wishes. They have the upper hand. What can we do? As we know from the last number of years, when we don't want to comply with whatever dictates they have, they can and do use the enforcement agencies to make us comply. Anyway, modern world, logic, and so this engine that I've been working on, this is a 52-year-old V8 engine, much more to the liking of you folks in the US. A lot of the cars in the UK, certainly in the UK anyway, but also in Europe, to a lesser extent perhaps, but certainly the 1970s and the 80s were quite small engines. A 2-litre engine would have been a big engine. Generally the cars were around about the 1300 to 1500, 1600 cc area. This thing is a 3-litre V8 engine, a sports saloon car. Now, it had a problem, and the problem was that it would start, but you had to rev the engine very hard to actually keep it running, otherwise it simply stopped. So, what was the problem? Well, here's the thing with the older machinery. It was logic, a matter of logic, application of logic. So I had a look at this engine. I only started it up, and sure enough, revved, ran fine. As soon as you took your foot off the accelerator, the engine would splutter, and stall out. But immediately that it stopped, I was stood outside the car and I was looking and watching, and I saw that underneath there was some liquid coming out from underneath the engine. There was only one conclusion I came to straight away, which was that this would be petrol. I went to the extent to confirm this, dipping my finger in it and smelling it. It was petrol. So I had a look down underneath the front of the engine, and I said, okay, turn the ignition on, we turn the ignition on, petrol was coming out and onto the ground from what I assumed then, and correctly say, was an overflow pipe from these twin Stromberg carburetors. So, okay, off with the ignition, it stops. On with the ignition, it starts. So I decided that this was the overflow for these Stromberg carburetors. So one of these carburetors, or both, there was a problem inside, either a needle valve or a float. The float system in them is very mechanical and very simple. The float closes off the valve as the petrol fills up in the carburetor, and it stops the valve letter and stops more petrol coming in. As the engine uses the petrol, the float goes down because the chamber is emptying of petrol, the valve opens, puts more petrol in, up goes the float again. The same as a stopcock in a toilet. So, I knew that was where the problem was. Now to find out which carburetor. So I took off the overflow pipes, and I thought if I take both overflow pipes off, one is down here and the other is down here, I can see which one is overflowing, or if both are overflowing. So we took the pipes off, turned the ignition on, it was overflowing out of this carburetor. No problem. So that had taken about 10 minutes. So, off came the air filter, disconnected all the pipes and the linkages here, well the cables really, I left all the linkages in place. I didn't want to disturb the carburetors, they're twin carburetors, they have to be balanced. Off came the carburetors, stripped down the bottom of this carburetor, the two came off together. Very simple to do. It took about, I suppose, 20 minutes in all because I was labelling things, so 20 minutes to take the carburetors off. Float chamber was fine in this one. It was the valve. New needle valve was 30 pence, I think. What's that? What's 30 pence? It's less than half a dollar anyway in the US. You guys could work that out. It's irrelevant. The cost is so small. We put the new valve in, put it all back together, everything connected up, started it up, started first time, lovely. Now why am I saying this? Why is this boring? Well, it's because it was the logic. I looked at what was wrong. I applied logic. Logic told me it would be a float in the carburettor or the needle valve in the carburettor. I took it apart. It wasn't the float, it was the needle valve. I replaced the needle valve for pennies, and it worked. Logic progressed, logic gave the answer, and it was correct. Nowadays, that's not so. We have a vehicle outside which operates with computers and has air suspension and sensors everywhere. And it has a bush, a rubber bush, on a back suspension arm link that has completely disappeared. It's gone. And so there's movement on the suspension arm which tells the computer that there's a problem, which triggers the ABS system, the SRS, everything. And so the car will start, but the suspension is inoperative. So it's sitting down on the ground, which makes it very awkward to work on, unfortunately. That car has so many sensors and computer systems. Logic doesn't always work. You can find something wrong with the car, or you can use your computer diagnostics to say there's a problem. It tells you what the problem is, but it doesn't tell you why that problem occurred. And you'll often find that you spend days chasing a problem because the computer diagnostics says it's this, but this went because of this, and this went because of this. Now, there's a guy in America with a YouTube channel. I honestly can't remember the name of his channel, but he's great to listen to. He's an older fella, probably, what would you say, in his 50s. And he was talking about this with modern cars. He was talking about a Ford. I'm not sure which Ford it was. A big four-wheel drive pickup Ford of some sort. Whatever. Modern car. Had a problem with the back lights. And that problem became a problem with the backlights and the radio, which became a problem with the backlights, the radio, and the windscreen wipers, and became a problem with the backlights, the radio, the windscreen wipers, and the indicators. All sorts of problems. He took it into a garage, and they found that it was because of the CAN bus system, all the wires anyway. The problem was picked up on the backlight. It was water running down the channeling, which got into the wiring from many other systems, and it brought everything down. The long and short of it is that it cost him, it said $5,500 to fix a backlight. Now, when I have a problem with a backlight on a car of this age, it's really quite complicated. What I have to do is I have to open the boot, remove the back cover from the lights, take out the bulb that doesn't work, and put in a new one. Now, if it's extremely complicated, I have to find the earth wire that's not working anymore, that's disconnected, that's broken, that's poorly earthed. You'll find with the older cars, and especially up here with the weather we have, you get problems with wiring the lights. But they're very simple and very logical. Modern cars are not so. So, sustainability, very easy to fix. I've said this before in a video. Keep them going, it saves resources. You'll also find that a lot of garages these days, modern mechanics, won't work on cars like these because they see these as being incredibly complicated. And they're not. But you certainly can't put a computer in to diagnose the problem. But the problems are always logical. You can diagnose it quite simply. Anyway, let me know what you think about our elected and unelected leaders and their level of ability. I know that if there was a natural disaster and I needed to get people around me who could help me and my family survive, I could contribute to that group. I can do even at the worst. I can labour. I may be an old man, but I can still labour. And do. As does my wife. But if I was looking for a team of people to work with, to help survive difficult times, there is no way at all I would look for a politician, or a bureaucrat, or a diplomat, because all they can do is talk. They're no practical use to me whatsoever, and yet they call the shots. And with no practical knowledge or practical use, they would say these things need scrapping. Explain the logic again, explain the logic of scrapping these resources that are here and at work. It seems rather wasteful to scrap this when it works fine and is easy to fix, than going out and buying something brand new that has taken more resources. As I say, but these people, these are the people who dictate what happens, the people who wear university postgraduate PhD students who can't fix their car and get annoyed when it gets fixed by somebody else but takes a week and a half. Interesting world we're living in. Ingratitude and a lack of acknowledgement of an individual's failings. I have many failings. There's a lot of things I don't know. I'm not going to cover that up by getting angry with somebody. Anyway, let me know what you think. A rainy day video. I have lots of stories I could tell. What stories do you want to hear? Leave a like, or otherwise, and leave a comment. Thank you very much indeed. Bye bye for now.